we could have a policy environment that was completely neutral between renting and owning. But if it means like a handful of rich jerks own all the land and we're all forced to rent, I don't see that as being a positive outcome.
Hi, and welcome to The Missing Middle. I'm Cara Stern.
And I'm Mike Moffatt.
And today we're talking about an idea out of the UK, and that's a tax break for landlords who sell their homes to their tenants.
But before we have that conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
So there's an election happening in the UK right now, and a lot of Canadians probably aren't paying very close attention. But why should Canadians care about this, Mike?
Well, I think first it is endlessly entertaining that the UK Conservatives are having all kinds of problems. The polls are changing quite a bit. There's been all kinds of gas, so it's just been fun. Maybe fun in sort of a dumpster fire type sense, but fun anyway. But I think in a more serious matter, that the UK is having a lot of the same issues that we're having. They have a housing crisis, just like we do. They're having challenges about housing international students. They're having a big debate right now about, how many international students should be allowed in the country. They're having issues with slow income growth, the lack of productivity, and so on. So because they are having so many of the same challenges that we're having here in Canada, I think we can look to see, how their parties are proposing to solve it and, mine it and see if there are any good ideas for us.
Yeah, that's how we got talking about this, because there was a proposal related to housing that we saw, and both of us were like, interesting. So that came from Rishi Sunak, the leader of the Conservatives, and he proposed eliminating the capital gains tax when landlords sell their investment properties to the current tenant. I thought that was kind of interesting because it's something that's like kind of similar to something that you and I had talked about, and I think proposed in an article together about whether there could be a decrease in capital gains tax to try to incentivize people who have investment properties to kind of get them onto the market so people can own the homes. But the fact that they tied it to just the tenant who's living there, and I think it's the tenant who's living there at the time that this was announced, like you can't just like bring in someone that wants to buy it and have them be your new tenant for a month. I think it's a kind of an interesting thing. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting as well. Just like us, the UK is having this problem where now 2 generations of people believe that they're never going to be able to own a home. So they're trying to restore the dream of home ownership. And that's what this is all about. This is saying, okay, we're going to create this pathway to home ownership where if you're currently a renter, you're renting a home, and that could be a townhouse, that could be a condo, whatever it is, and your landlord decides to sell, he now has a tax advantage to selling to you rather than to selling to another investor. So, is it going to fix a housing crisis? Absolutely not. But I thought it was an interesting way to help restore the dream of home ownership. So I'm curious which camp you're in. There's no right answer to this. I won't get offended because I know, I'm offside with a lot of the housing advocates that say like this should just be about affordability. The government shouldn't really care if that comes from rental or ownership. I think it matters. You are a resident millennial. You are of that first generation that's been priced out of ownership. So would love to get your take.
I think a lot of people still really value owning a home. So we need to have that as an option because so many people care about it. And part of the reason they care about it so much is because of all the incentives to own a home from the government, like having the capital gains tax exemption for your primary residence is huge. There's so many parts of owning a home that are really financially advantageous compared to renting. So the solution is that they would then make renting more beneficial. Like give tax exemptions to other investments if you're a renter that would kind of equal what a homeowner would get. And then you would kind of even the playing field. And I feel like in an ideal world, yes, that would be great. I just don't see it happening right now in our culture. I think that's too big of a change to expect. And therefore, I think the best thing that politicians can be doing is trying to help people get into the home ownership situation that so many of them want to be in, and that it would be so economically beneficial to them.
Yeah, but I would actually go further. And again, this is where I am offside with a lot of the housing advocates who say, okay, if everything, if the government were strictly neutral about everything, then whatever outcome matters. And I said, well, I disagree. Right? We could have a policy environment that was completely neutral between renting and owning, but if it means like a handful of rich jerks own all the land and we're all forced to rent, I don't see that as being a positive outcome. I actually think choice matters. And if it means that government has to tilt the playing field in one way or another. And again, I want to make this very clear. That is very different than saying, okay, we need to benefit home ownership. I view this through a lens of choice, right? That young people should have the option of buying a home. They shouldn't be locked out of that, but they also shouldn't be locked out of renting, right? There are a lot of advantages to being a renter, and I think that's great. So ultimately, in my view, this is about choice. And simply going, okay, we're going to have a policy neutral environment, and then the 5 richest families in Toronto own all the land, all the houses. Yeah, no, I'm sorry, that is not a good outcome.
How much of a difference do you think this will really make? Like, do you think that a lot of landlords will actually be able to sell their homes to those tenants?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be massive uptake here, and even the Conservative Party has said that they're only projecting that this will cost the Treasury about £20 million in lost tax revenue, which isn't a lot, but I think this does make a bit of difference, and I do think if we had something similar in Canada, would we see a lot of family-sized homes change hands? Probably not. But what we might see is somebody who's living in a one-bedroom condo that was owned by an investor. We might see an investor say, you know what, I will sell this to you. I will sell this to you at a discount. And that creates a situation where they now own the home, and they can start to build equity in it and use it over time to buy something more family sized.
I could see people wanting to do that if there you have a tenant that's rent controlled. I don't know what the UK situation is with rent control, but I know here, if they have a rent control tenants that aren't paying market value and their costs have gone up because they still have a mortgage on the property and rates have gone up, like it might be beneficial for them to want to get rid of that property, and that's like a nice way to sell it to the person, who's been paying part of the mortgage, frankly. But also it makes it easier because they don't have to hire an agent. They don't have to. They can just get a lawyer to draft it up. Like they'd probably save a lot of money on it if they're able to sell it to the tenant. Of course, the question is, can the tenants afford it? And is this really just helping people who are like almost there anyways? I can see the criticism of that. Are landlords going to find a way to exploit this to be able to just make a ton of money anyways, instead of using this in the way it was meant to be done?
Yeah, you worry about a few things like going, okay, I'm going to sell this condo to another investor, but I'll just rent it to him or her for a month first. Oh, they're the tenant, and then sell it. So the Conservatives have thought of these things and done things like saying, okay, they have to be a tenant, the day that this was announced. So you can't play these games. So they've really tried to deal with some of those unintended consequences, but tax lawyers and investors are very creative. I'm sure they'll find ways to game this system, but so far it does look like the Conservatives really try to block the obvious ways of doing it.
Is this something that politicians here should be looking at and maybe considering suggesting here in Canada?
Yeah, I really like this idea. I don't know if I would go to a full capital gains cut. I think that's excessive. But I do think having some kind of time limited discount, I think would be particularly beneficial. And I actually do think there would be significant uptake particularly in the condo market. You've got so many investors who've bought condos who, would like to get out of them because of higher interest rates and just general economic conditions. So I actually think there is a lot of merits to this, or to something like it. Will it solve all of our problems? Definitely not. But it's an interesting idea. You'd have to make it time limited to encourage encourage people to move quickly. I think the conservatives here said that it's only transactions in the next 2 to 3 years. I think that's smart. So 2 years, yeah. So I would love to see something similar. Again, I think it's a little too generous here. Maybe cut the capital gains inclusion rate to, I don't know, like 35%, not eliminate it entirely. But I think there's merit to this. So how about you? Would you like to see something similar in Canada?
So given how angry politicians were and lots of rich people were about the capital gains tax inclusion rate going up, I guess maybe we'd see like jubilance if it went down a little bit, even if it's just time limited like this. Yeah, I think it'd be pretty cool to see something like this, because it might actually help some people. It might actually get people into owning who otherwise wouldn't be able to. And I don't know if there's I'm trying to think of the political downside to this. I guess there'd be people who would say, why are we helping people who are kind of almost able to buy and just need this slight discount basically to get into the housing market? I can definitely see people saying that, but do you think that there'd be a big backlash to a politician who proposed this?
Yeah, I would say a backlash, but I could see a lot of folks, even a lot of housing folks, not necessarily liking this. First, you go, well, you get a lot of people who think, either rightly or wrongly, that investors have broken this market. So you're like, okay, well, why are you doing something nice for investors when they're the cause of the problem? And then again, you get the sort of tenure neutrality people who generally don't like anything that seems to benefit home ownership over rental. And then you might get a bunch of folks who say, well, the problem's simply a supply one. So if it's not a supply solution, it's not a real solution. So I do see this not necessarily going over well with a lot of advocates. And that's not necessarily to say there would be a lot of backlash, but, it'd be more, housing nerds saying, oh, these guys have kind of lost the plot. But again, I'm going to disagree. I actually like this way of thinking, and I'd love to see more of it. I'd love to see governments use creative policy tools, creative tax tools to try and restore the dream of home ownership, which has been lost with millennials and Gen Z.
Thank you for watching and listening, and thanks as always to our producer, Meredith Martin.
So if you have any burning housing or economics questions, or want to tell me why I'm wrong about tenure neutrality, please send us an email at missingmiddlepodcast@gmail.com.
And we'll see you next time.